Eleanor, let's get a divorce. Spencer Sterling stood in the middle of the living room, tossing a ring of keys to a luxury Greenwich estate onto the coffee table. He didn't even sit down in his flawlessly pressed suit, looking as if he had just stepped out of the operating room, and his entire demeanor expressed impatience. "That mansion is yours," he said. "It's worth $5 million. It'll be enough for the rest of your life. Sign the papers." I sat on the sofa and looked at him. Someone was standing behind him. No, the person didn't step inside, but I could see a slender silhouette in the doorway, wearing pink fig scrubs and white Dansko clogs peeking out from underneath them. It was the surgical resident, Madison Blake. She turned 27 this year, 8 years younger than I was. Seeing my silence, Spencer added, "Madison is 2 months pregnant. I have to take responsibility for her." He spoke with such a righteous look, as if adultery were a virtue. I lowered my gaze to the keys on the table, to the $5 million mansion. He worked as the vice chair of the surgical department at a Manhattan hospital, earning a base salary of $400,000 a year. That estate had been purchased by his father many years ago, and was put in Spencer's name. Now, he was offering it as a divorce settlement, acting generous, as if throwing a bone to a beggar. I reached out and picked up the pen. Spencer was clearly taken aback. Perhaps he expected me to cry, scream, smash dishes, or ask what made this resident better than me. He had probably even prepared lines like, "You're too controlling, you only think about work, you don't know how to be affectionate." But I said nothing. I opened the divorce agreement and began reviewing it page by page. The division of assets was clearly spelled out. The mansion went to me, while the rest of the savings and cars went to him. We had no children, so custody wasn't an issue. Simple and clean, like a surgical consent form. On the last page, I signed my name, Eleanor Vance. Spencer's Adam's apple bobbed. He clearly hadn't expected everything to happen so quickly. "Are you not even going to check the property deeds?" he asked. I pushed the signed agreement back toward him and said, "I already looked. I won't let a single cent of what is mine slip away, and I don't need a single square foot of what belongs to someone else." I stood up, took the keys, and walked past Spencer. Madison hastily stepped aside in the doorway, but she still couldn't resist throwing a glance at me. Her eyes held triumph, defiance, and the superiority of a victor. I stopped, turned my head, and looked at her. She was wearing a Chanel jacket, obviously brand new. The tag hadn't been completely torn off, and the tip of a white thread was visible. Spencer had bought it with my money because last month I had transferred my $150,000 annual bonus into our joint checking account. "Madison Blake, isn't it?" I said. Her face flushed slightly. "Hello, Dr. Vance," she said quietly. I smiled. I knew a smile suited me. "The keys to that mansion are in my hands," I told her. "If you want to live in it, you'll have to ask for my permission first." Madison's face instantly went pale. Spencer frowned and said, "Eleanor, don't complicate things. The agreement is signed, and the house is yours." I said nothing more and left. That evening, I returned to my real home. Not to that Greenwich estate, but to the historic Upper East Side townhouse my mother had left me. When my mother died, she left me a piece of prime Manhattan real estate worth over $15 million. Spencer didn't know about it because I had never told him. For all 5 years of our marriage, I pretended to be an ordinary OB/GYN clinic doctor with a monthly salary of $12,000, which barely reached $20,000 with bonuses. I used to think humility was a virtue. Now I understood that humility only makes men think you're easy to abuse. I walked into the house and tossed the ring of mansion keys onto the marble kitchen island. Then I brought a very heavy cardboard box out of my study and dragged it to the living room fireplace. Inside were stacks of printed letter-sized papers, neatly bound together. 327 academic papers, all written by me, all published under the name Spencer Sterling. Over these 5 years, he had managed to secure his position at a top-tier hospital, gain the title of associate professor, and become vice chair of the department not because of his skills with a scalpel, but because of these papers. Through sleepless nights, I had searched for materials, processed data, and written reviews for leading medical journals. Every day, I was laying a brick on his path to his current position. He thought I was obligated to do it. He thought it was my natural duty as a wife to edit his manuscripts at night, generate innovative ideas, and fend off nitpicking journal editors. He didn't know that I had kept the raw data for every single article. I had records with the chronological history of how each paper was written. If he had dared to cheat me in the divorce agreement, I could have stripped him of everything overnight. But I didn't do it. Not because I was generous, but because he wasn't worth it. I placed the box in front of the large brick fireplace, opened the flue, and grabbed a lighter. The first page caught fire. The flames licked the paper, sending black ash up the chimney. The second, the third. Entire stacks of articles flew into the fire, crackling loudly. The flames reflected on the brick walls of the historic townhouse, casting a giant shadow. I didn't cry. I crouched by the fire and burned them, page by page. I burned them for 2 solid hours. When I reached the last one, I reached out and flipped the page, watching the name Spencer Sterling be devoured by the flames. The ink blackened first, then curled, and finally turned to ash. I had burned those 5 years. Spencer, do you think giving me a mansion can make up for these 5 years? You underestimate me too much. In 3 days, you'll learn what true payback looks like. The next morning, I went to the hospital to process my resignation. Not out of heartbreak, but because I had stopped wanting to work there a long time ago. I planned to convert the townhouse my mother left me into a high-end private OB/GYN clinic. I had the skills, the experience, and the funds. There was no need to stay at a crowded city hospital and constantly run into Spencer. After filing the paperwork, I stepped into the hallway and bumped into him. He was in his white coat, talking to the chief of surgery. Seeing me, he visibly tensed. I walked over and said, "Good morning, Dr. Sterling. What are you doing here?" He hissed. "I'm resigning," I answered. He was stunned. "Resigning? Are you out of your mind? You've worked at this hospital for 6 years. You barely got your attending status. Why would you resign?" I smiled and said, "I just want a change of scenery." The chief of surgery, standing nearby, heard our conversation and said regretfully, "Eleanor, have you thought this through? Your clinical dossier is still here. With your experience, you could become a senior partner soon. It's a shame for you to leave now." Spencer's face changed instantly. He understood exactly what I meant. That clinical dossier was another crucial document I had written for him. It detailed all his surgeries over the past 2 years, including the true circumstances behind a few severe medical errors. That dossier wasn't a research paper. It was his blackmail material. He had begged me to write it because he was incapable of doing it himself. And 3 days ago, through an intermediary, I had handed the original copy of that dossier to his worst enemy, the other vice chair, Victor Zane, from general surgery. Zane had been eyeing the chair position for a long time, and all he lacked was the evidence to take Spencer down. Now, that evidence was in his hands. "It's fine," I told the chief. "I've already given the clinical dossier to the appropriate person." Spencer's face went white as a sheet. He suddenly grabbed my wrist, his voice trembling. "Eleanor, what do you mean? Who did you give the dossier to?" I looked down at his hand gripping my wrist and pried his fingers open one by one. "Spencer, you wanted a divorce, didn't you? You wanted to take responsibility for her? So take your responsibility. As for the dossier, that's your problem, not mine." With that, I turned and walked away. I heard him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. That same day, Zane submitted the dossier to the state medical board and the hospital's ethics committee. The records of Spencer's 2 malpractice incidents were blown wide open. Once, during a cholecystectomy, he accidentally severed the patient's common bile duct, which led to a risky corrective surgery. Another time, he failed to respond promptly to a post-operative hemorrhage, forcing the patient to be transferred to another hospital in critical condition. These incidents had been covered up, but now everything was laid out in black and white. Spencer could forget about ever becoming the department chair. And things turned out even more interesting for Madison. During her USMLE Step 3 exam, an old classmate of mine, who happened to be her residency program director, flagged her test as highly suspicious for cheating. She had taken the exam 3 times and failed. This time, they didn't even release her scores, they immediately launched an investigation. Without her medical license, she couldn't even work as a resident, let alone get hired as full-time staff. Spencer thought he had found a young, beautiful woman, but he had no idea that this woman lacked even basic professional qualifications. This was his retribution. 3 days later, Spencer ambushed me outside the gates of my Upper East Side townhouse. His white coat was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept in 3 days. Seeing me, he rushed forward. His knees buckled, and he almost collapsed onto the sidewalk. "Ellie, I'm begging you," he said, his voice hoarse beyond recognition. "Take back that dossier. The ethics committee is meeting to discuss my punishment. My career is over. I have nothing left." I leaned against the wrought iron gate and looked at him. This man, who had told me Madison was pregnant and he had to take responsibility, was now sinking to his knees before me like a beaten dog. "Spencer, you still have the mansion," I said. $5 million is enough for the rest of your life." His face twitched. "By the way," I continued, "I forgot to tell you something. When your father bought that estate, he took out a bank loan using his company's stock as collateral. And the largest creditor of that company is me." Spencer's eyes bulged. "What did you say?" "The inheritance my mother left me is enough to buy your father's entire company," I told him. "Spencer, you thought you gave me a mansion. You gave me a mortgaged property with an outstanding debt." His lips trembled. I leaned in and, looking him dead in the eyes, clearly articulated. 3 days ago, when you forced me to sign the divorce agreement, you probably felt on top of the world, thinking that by giving me the house, you were showing the pinnacle of nobility. Listen to me, Spencer. You're soon going to lose your job, your home, your reputation, and the woman carrying your child, because the mother of your child can't even pass her medical boards. She won't be able to feed herself." Spencer collapsed against the gate, sobbing. I walked into the courtyard and closed the door behind me. From outside came his heart-wrenching cries. I leaned against the door, looked up at the sky over the old Manhattan courtyard, and exhaled deeply. "Eleanor, you did everything right, and this is only the beginning." Chapter 2. The mistress's ruined mansion dream. Madison thought she had won. In Spencer's rented Manhattan apartment, she was packing her things, stuffing all the expensive clothes from his closet into her suitcase. As she packed, she spoke loudly on the phone with a friend, making sure the entire hallway could hear. "I'm telling you, Spencer gave me that estate, that standalone mansion in Greenwich worth $5 million. A surprised voice came through the phone. "Really? But didn't he say he was giving it to his ex-wife?" Madison scoffed. "Giving it to his ex-wife was just for show. Spencer said that as soon as the divorce is finalized, he'll transfer the deed to me. That old hag. They just let her stay there a couple of days to enjoy it." Right as she said this, Spencer came home. He looked terrible, with huge dark circles under his eyes. Walking in, he didn't even take off his shoes, but simply collapsed onto the sofa. Madison sat next to him and flirtatiously asked, "Spencer, when are we moving into the mansion? I can't wait anymore. I've already figured everything out. We'll paint the master bedroom pink, and hang a crystal chandelier in the living room." Spencer waved her off irritably. "Stop making noise. Let me have some peace." Madison pouted but didn't dare throw a tantrum. She knew he was in a bad mood. The hospital's ethics committee was investigating those 2 malpractice cases, and that bastard Zane was pouring oil on the fire every day. But she still couldn't resist asking, "What about the keys to the mansion? Has your ex-wife not returned them yet?" Spencer remained silent. "You have the property deeds, right?" Madison asked again. "We can go straight to the county clerk and transfer it without her consent." I looked it up. The divorce agreement says the house goes to her, but as long as she hasn't legally transferred the title, you can revoke the gift. Spencer sat up abruptly and glared at her. "You looked it up? Who asked you to look it up?" Madison got scared by his reaction and shrank back. I just asked." Spencer took a deep breath and stood up. "Tomorrow I'll take you to see the house. But don't get your hopes up. Eleanor is not a simple person." Madison didn't understand what he meant. But hearing they were going to see the house, she immediately jumped for joy. The next morning, Madison specifically wore that Chanel jacket and applied flawless makeup. She even wore a diamond necklace Spencer had given her. Even though the stone was only 0.3 carats, she felt it was enough to show off. Spencer drove her to the elite Greenwich neighborhood. The mansion was massive. 3 stories, a garden, a pool. The facade was finished in beige marble, and 2 rows of sycamore trees lined the driveway. Madison stood in front of the wrought iron gates, her hands shaking with excitement. "It's so beautiful," she squealed. "Spencer, is this really going to be our home?" Spencer didn't answer and pressed the intercom. The gate was opened by a middle-aged woman in a cleaning company uniform holding a tablet. "Who are you here to see?" she asked. "I'm here for Eleanor Vance," Spencer replied. The woman looked at her tablet and said flatly, "Miss Vance doesn't live here. This property is managed by our company. Miss Vance is the owner. Without her consent, no one can enter." Madison was furious. "What management? I'm with Spencer Sterling. This house originally belonged to him." The woman glanced at her tablet again. "According to our records and the divorce settlement, this house belongs to Miss Eleanor Vance. Do you have written permission from her?" Madison stomped her foot in anger and pulled out her phone to call Eleanor. But after scrolling through her entire contacts list, she realized she didn't have her number. Spencer's face was darker than a thundercloud. He took out his phone and dialed Eleanor's number. It rang 6 times with no answer. On the 7th ring, the call was declined. He called again, and it went straight to voicemail. Madison panicked. Is she not going to give it to us? You said the house would definitely be ours. Spencer clenched his teeth and hissed. When did I say that? I said the house went to her. But when my father bought it, he took out a loan. If she wants to sell it, she has to pay off the debt first. And she doesn't have that kind of money. Madison's eyes darted around. So we can help her pay off the loan, and then she'll give us the house. Right? Spencer let out a cold laugh. You'll pay it off? Do you know how much debt is on it? $1 million. What are you going to pay with? Madison went silent. As a medical resident, she made roughly $60,000 a year. How far would that go? At that moment, a black Mercedes S-Class slowly pulled up to the gates. The window rolled down. Eleanor sat behind the wheel in dark sunglasses and a sleek black trench coat. She looked at the couple standing by the gates, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. Spencer, Madison, what are you doing at my house? She asked. Madison ran to the car and banged on the window. Eleanor, don't celebrate too early. This house originally belonged to Spencer. What right do you have to steal it? Eleanor took off her sunglasses and looked at her. Madison felt a bit intimidated under her gaze, but blurted out anyway. The divorce agreement says it's yours, but you haven't transferred the title yet. The house is still marital property. I've already consulted a lawyer. If Spencer doesn't agree, you won't get this house. Eleanor chuckled. She opened the door, stepped out of the car, and stood in front of Madison. She was half a head taller, and just her presence diminished Madison's arrogance. Madison, which lawyer did you consult? Eleanor asked. I suggest you change them, because your lawyer failed to tell you one thing. The deed to this property doesn't bear Spencer Sterling's name. Madison stood frozen. What? Eleanor pulled a folder from her bag, opened it, and held a document up to Madison's face. Under the section, labeled Grantee, 3 words were clearly written. Eleanor I. Vance. The date was 5 years ago, 2 months after her and Spencer's wedding. Spencer's face completely drained of color. He snatched the deed and flipped it over 3 times. His voice shook. This is impossible. My father bought this house. How can it be in your name? Eleanor took the deed back and slipped it into her bag. Because 5 years ago, when your company started having financial trouble, you begged me to take the money my mother left me and help your family pay down the mortgage. In exchange, the house was transferred to my name. Spencer, you haven't forgotten, have you? That $1 million was mine. Spencer's lips trembled. He hadn't forgotten. Of course he hadn't. 5 years ago, he knelt before Eleanor and begged for her help. Without a word, Eleanor took $1 million from her mother's inheritance and helped the Sterling family clear the immediate debt. Back then, he swore he would treat her well for the rest of his life. And what was he doing now? Bringing his mistress to look at the house. Madison looked at Spencer in disbelief. You lied to me. You kept saying the house was yours, but it turns out it belongs to your ex-wife. Spencer couldn't utter a single word. Eleanor looked at Madison and said calmly, let me give you a piece of advice. A man who could betray me can betray you too. You think you've won? You're just the next me. With that, she walked through the gates and slammed them shut in their faces. Madison stood outside the gates, shaking with anger. She turned and glared at Spencer, tears welling in her eyes. Spencer, you bastard. You lied to me, saying the house was yours. You lied to me, saying you would marry me. You lied to me, saying you would give me a better life. And in the end, you don't even have your own place. Spencer yanked at his tie in frustration. Stop it. I'll think of something. Think of something? Madison yelled. What can you think of? Your problems at the hospital aren't solved. Your ex-wife leaked all your blackmail material. You still want to be department chair? Keep dreaming. Spencer's face twisted in rage, and he suddenly slapped Madison across the face. Shut up. Madison covered her face, looking at him in utter shock. The man who had whispered sweet words and promised to take responsibility had just raised a hand against her. She burst into tears and ran away. Spencer was left standing there, staring at the closed gates and the gleaming brass plaque that read Vance Residence. Suddenly, it felt as though for the past 5 years, he had been living as a total joke. Chapter 3. The Hospital Strike Back. Victor Zane was a ruthless man. He had worked at the hospital for 12 years. His surgical skills were no worse than Sterling's. But because he didn't know how to write academic papers or network, Spencer constantly passed him up for promotions. Every year during performance reviews, Sterling would present reports based on papers published in high-impact journals, while Zane could only stand by and grind his teeth. He knew Spencer hadn't written those papers. Everyone in the department knew it, but no one dared speak up because Spencer's father-in-law, Eleanor's father, was a major figure in the healthcare system. But now Eleanor had divorced him, and that protective umbrella was gone. Zane felt his time had come. The clinical dossier Eleanor had passed to him through a middleman detailed 2 severe malpractice cases Spencer had committed over the last 2 years. One time, during a gallbladder removal, he accidentally severed a patient's common bile duct, resulting in a second surgery. Another time, he failed to react to postoperative bleeding in a timely manner, and the patient who nearly died had to be transferred to another hospital. Spencer had covered up both cases. The first patient received $50,000 in hush money, the second was transferred, and the medical records were completely rewritten. But Eleanor had kept the original charts. She was Spencer's wife and a doctor at the same hospital. She had access to all the original versions of the medical records. After receiving the dossier, Zane didn't hand it over immediately. He waited for the right moment. He waited until Eleanor finalized her resignation. Until Spencer thought everything had blown over. Only then did he take the dossier to the ethics committee. On Monday morning, a general assembly was held at the hospital. Spencer sat among the surgeons, his heart pounding. He hadn't slept a wink the night before. Madison had run off. Eleanor wasn't picking up her phone. His father's company was also in trouble. Allegedly, a major creditor had suddenly demanded the early repayment of a $3 million loan within 3 months. He didn't know that the creditor was Eleanor. At the meeting, the hospital president first summarized the hospital's performance for the first half of the year, then discussed future plans. Spencer listened with half an ear, nervously twirling a pen. Suddenly, the president changed his tone. Recently, we've received complaints regarding the professional conduct of certain doctors. The hospital administration takes this very seriously and has already formed a special committee to investigate. Pending the results of the investigation, the doctors in question are suspended from all surgeries and patient consultations. Silence fell over the room. Everyone knew who the president was talking about. Spencer's face turned white, as if all the color had been washed away. Zane stood up. His voice was low, but distinct. Mr. President, I have a proposal. Since we are conducting an investigation, it must be thorough and transparent. I suggest we present these specific medical records to a closed-door morbidity and mortality conference and the peer review committee. This will prevent rumors that the administration is covering for someone. Spencer snapped his head around and glared at Zane. Zane met his gaze and smiled slightly. The president thought for a moment and said, "All right, medical records will prepare the files for a formal peer review." Spencer's hands began to shake. He knew what those medical records meant. If the peer review committee saw them, his reputation was ruined. And in this profession, reputation is life. Without a reputation, no patient would ever lie on his operating table, and no hospital would ever hire him. After the meeting, Spencer burst into Zane's office. He grabbed him by the collar of his white coat, his eyes bloodshot. "You did this. You handed over those papers. Zane, do you want to destroy me?" Zane didn't fight back, but instead smiled. "Spencer, understand this. I'm not destroying you, you're destroying yourself. You made those mistakes. You forged the records. I only showed the truth." Spencer's fist flew up, but it didn't come down, because he saw Eleanor in the doorway. He didn't know when she had arrived at the hospital. She stood leaning against the frame, arms crossed over her chest, watching him. Spencer let go of Zane and staggered over to Eleanor. Sobs broke through his voice. "Ellie, why are you doing this? We were husband and wife. Why are you destroying me?" Eleanor looked at him. Her gaze was as calm as the surface of a lake. "Spencer, I'm destroying you. When you were cheating on me, did you think about the fact that we were husband and wife? When you let her get pregnant, did you think about the fact that we were husband and wife? When you threw the keys to the mansion at me like a handout to a beggar, did you think about the fact that we were husband and wife?" Spencer couldn't find the words to reply. "And besides," Eleanor continued, "I only showed the truth. The truth was always there. I didn't invent it. You think this is unfair? You feel wronged? Have you thought about those 2 patients you harmed? They didn't even have the chance to complain because you rewrote their medical records. Tears finally poured from Spencer's eyes. He fell to his knees in the hallway, grabbing onto Eleanor's scrubs. "Ellie, I'm begging you," he rasped. "Go to the president. Tell them these records are fake. Tell them you did it out of revenge. Take the blame for me. Please. I'm begging you." Eleanor looked down at him. This kneeling man with whom she had shared a bed for 5 years. She once thought he was her world. She had helped him write papers, process data, and pass evaluations. She had given him the best years of her life, and now he was kneeling, begging her to take the fall for his crimes. She bent down and peeled his hands off her scrubs. "Spencer," she said very quietly, "do you know why I put up with you for 5 years? Because before my mother died, she told me one thing. Find a man you love and accept him with all his flaws. I always remembered those words, and so I accepted all your selfishness, your greed, and your hypocrisy." She paused and straightened up. "But now my mother's words no longer apply, because you don't deserve it." She turned and walked away. Doctors and nurses in the hallway watched the scene without saying a word. Someone discreetly took a photo of Spencer on his knees and sent it to the hospital staff group chat. 3 minutes later, the photo spread throughout the entire hospital. 10 minutes later, it hit physician group chats in other cities. That same day, Spencer received his notice from the hospital. Suspended from all clinical duties pending the conclusion of the investigation. He sat in his empty office. His phone was blowing up with messages from colleagues, medical school classmates, and doctors he knew. Some asked if he was in trouble. Some wrote that they had seen the medical records and admitted things looked bad. Others simply blocked him. Madison saw the photo too. She was packing her things in the rented apartment, preparing to move. Seeing the picture, she froze for a moment, then tossed her phone aside. She didn't care about Spencer. She was only worried about one thing. Her USMLE Step 3 exam. Her results from the latest exam had come back marked under review. She called the testing center, and they told her that her test had raised suspicions and required further investigation. She didn't understand what suspicion meant. She had taken the test herself. Well, she had copied a few questions from the person sitting next to her, but that wasn't so terrible, right? She didn't know that her seating arrangement had been specifically orchestrated by Eleanor's old classmate, and her neighbor was an employee of the testing center who intentionally filled in incorrect answers so Madison would copy them and get a perfect score. Incorrect answers resulting in a maximum score that was enough to prove cheating. Madison would never see her medical license for the rest of her life. Chapter 4, Madison's Panic. Madison was in a panic. She called the testing center over 20 times, but the answer was always the same. "Your results are under review, please wait." She couldn't wait. She had applied for residency programs at 3 hospitals, and every single one required her exam results. Without them, she wouldn't even get an interview. She called Spencer, hoping he could use his connections to help, but his line was constantly busy. He was busy looking for a lawyer to defend himself against the hospital's accusations. Madison paced around the rented apartment like a caged animal. She found a number Spencer had given her earlier, some official from the Department of Health. She dialed. After a long wait, a voice on the other end answered. "Hello, who is this?" "Hello," Madison said ingratiatingly. "I'm a friend of Dr. Spencer Sterling. I'd like to consult with you regarding my medical licensing exam." The voice cut her off. "How are you related to him?" "I'm his girlfriend," Madison answered. The line went silent for a few seconds. "Spencer Sterling is currently under investigation. You'd better stay away from him. I can't help you with your exam. Wait for the results." The call disconnected. Madison gripped her phone, shaking with anger. She hated Spencer for his helplessness, for the fact that he couldn't solve even such a small issue. But even more, she hated Eleanor. She hated her for haunting her like a ghost, for interfering even with her exam. She didn't know that the exam was indeed tied to Eleanor. That same day, Madison received a call from an unknown number. "Madison Blake? I'm Dr. Linda Patterson, Chief Medical Officer at Hope Private Clinic. I heard you're looking for a residency spot." Madison's heart raced. Hope Clinic was the best private facility in the city. If she got in there, her life would be set. Yes, Dr. Patterson, hello. I really want to work at your clinic. I reviewed your resume," the chief medical officer said. "Everything looks good, but your USMLE, Step 3, you haven't passed it yet, correct?" "I just took the exam," Madison answered hastily. "The results will be out soon. I'm sure I passed." Dr. Patterson chuckled. "Madison, I won't beat around the bush. I have a friend, your program director, Professor Zimmerman. He asked me to pass along a few words. Madison's heart sank. What words? He said that when you were under his supervision, you were often late and left early. You kept sloppy medical records, and you sat on your phone in the operating room. He was willing to turn a blind eye and give you a recommendation, but someone asked him to reconsider his decision. Madison's lips trembled. Who? Who asked him? You don't need to know that. Just remember one thing, you won't pass your licensing exam. Don't waste your time. Change professions. The call ended. Madison collapsed onto the floor. Tears streamed from her eyes. Professor Zimmerman, her program director, the smiling old man who praised her every time they met, calling her smart and capable. She thought he really liked her, that he would write her a letter of recommendation, that he would help her get a job. And it turned out that a single word from him could destroy her entire future. And the person who made Professor Zimmerman change his mind was someone Madison knew without even guessing. She grabbed her phone and frantically searched for Eleanor's number. She had secretly saved it from Spencer's phone, but had never dared to call until now. Now, she didn't care. The call went through. Eleanor, what are you trying to achieve? Madison screamed into the receiver. I stole your husband. Take it out on him. Why are you coming after me? I didn't do anything to you. A 2-second silence hung on the line. Then Eleanor's calm voice sounded. Madison, you're mistaken. I'm not destroying you, you're destroying yourself. Bullshit. You forced Professor Zimmerman to set me up, didn't you? You think I don't know what kind of relationship you two have? Eleanor laughed. Professor Zimmerman is an old classmate of mine. We studied together for 4 years. He owes me his career. I helped him write his thesis, so he remained in my debt. Madison was stunned. Classmate? Professor Zimmerman was over 50, and Eleanor was only 35. How could they be classmates? She didn't know that Eleanor had entered the university at 17 and finished her medical degree ahead of her peers. Professor Zimmerman was in her study group. They wrote papers together, took exams together, and did their clinical rotations together. Professor Zimmerman had held on to that debt for over a decade. Madison, Eleanor continued, did you think cheating on the exam would go unnoticed? The girl sitting next to you had the master answer key for your testing room. You copied 8 questions, and all 8 were wrong, because that student deliberately changed the correct answers to incorrect ones. You copied for a perfect score, but your flawless answer sheet didn't match the master key at all. Do you know what that's called? It's called irrefutable evidence. Madison's mind went blank. She remembered that on that day, a slightly chubby girl who kept coughing was sitting next to her. She copied from her because the girl looked very smart. It turned out she was an employee of the testing center. Madison burst into sobs. Eleanor, I'm begging you, let me go, she rasped. What happened with Spencer is my fault. I shouldn't have seduced him. I'll leave him. Please let me go. Eleanor was quiet for a few seconds. Madison, you'll leave? Do you think you still have the right to talk about leaving? You've already destroyed Spencer and destroyed yourself. I didn't force you. This was your own choice. What do you want? Madison sobbed. Money? A house? I'll give you everything. I have nothing. I'll give Spencer back to you. Fine, I don't need Spencer. You can keep him. Just ask yourself first if you still want him. The call disconnected. Madison sat with the phone in her hands for 10 minutes. Suddenly, she remembered something. Her stomach. She touched her belly. It was already slightly rounded. The baby was 3 months along. Her pregnancy was her ultimate trump card. Spencer wanted this baby desperately. He was an only son. The Sterlings were a traditional, wealthy family, and his parents were desperate for a grandson to carry on the family name. Before, when Eleanor couldn't get pregnant for 5 years, Spencer's mother often made cruel remarks about her being barren. Now that Madison was pregnant, and if she was carrying a boy, the Sterling family wouldn't abandon her. Hope flickered in her again. She picked up her phone and sent Spencer a text. Spencer, I understand everything now, I won't fight with you anymore. I have your baby in my belly, I can't give him up. Let's just live well, okay? It doesn't matter if we have a house or not, money or not, I will be with you. The message went through, but there was no reply. Madison waited half an hour and sent another. Spencer, where are you? Silence again. She called. The phone was turned off. Madison's heart dropped. She didn't know that at this exact moment, Spencer was consulting his lawyer on how to prove the baby in Madison's belly was his because that baby, in fact, was not his at all. Chapter 5. Spencer begs for reconciliation. Spencer had never been in such a humiliating position in his life. The ethics committee began its work in the surgical department, pulling all his medical records for the past 3 years. In a closed-door peer review meeting, Zane projected those 2 rewritten medical records onto a large screen and began analyzing them page by page. Look here. The time in the observation log doesn't match the time of the doctor's orders. The patient began hemorrhaging post-op at 5:10 p.m., but the log says 6:00 p.m. What was Dr. Sterling doing during that hour? Dead silence filled the conference room. Spencer sat with his head down, digging his nails into his palms. And now look here. Zane continued. The patient's signature is noticeably different from his signatures on other documents. I suspect this informed consent was signed retroactively. Spencer couldn't take it and jumped up. Zane, that's enough. You're a general surgeon. What right do you have to pick apart my cases? I don't have the right, Zane replied calmly, but the committee does. I'm merely helping them prepare the materials. Dr. Sterling, don't worry. The committee chairman tapped the table. Dr. Sterling, please take a seat. If you find Dr. Zane's presence inappropriate, he can step out. Clenching his teeth, Spencer sat down. He knew Zane wouldn't leave. The whole hospital was waiting for his disgrace, and Zane was simply the most active spectator. The investigation lasted 3 days. During this time, Spencer lost 10 pounds. Gray hair appeared on his head. His lawyer told him that if the committee found him guilty, he wouldn't only be fired from the hospital, but could also lose his medical license. Furthermore, the lawyer hesitated, those 2 patients might sue you for malpractice. The settlement amount won't be small. Spencer's head spun. His father's company was also in deep trouble. That mysterious creditor had demanded the early repayment of a $3 million loan within 3 months. His father ended up in the hospital from the stress. His mother called him in tears, begging him to figure something out. But what could he figure out? All his savings had gone to the lawyer. Soon he would have no money to pay rent. Madison kept sending him messages one after another. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Did you abandon me? He was so irritated by them that he simply blocked her number. On Monday morning, Spencer did something no one expected. He drove to Eleanor's townhouse and broke down on the sidewalk. He collapsed against the wrought iron gate, weeping into his hands. The townhouse was on a quiet Manhattan street, but there were plenty of pedestrians. Old women with shopping bags, men walking dogs, delivery drivers. Everyone walking by stopped, looked, and pulled out their phones to take a picture. Spencer didn't care. His reputation was already destroyed. Things couldn't get any worse. He waited for an hour before the door opened. Eleanor stood on the threshold in loungewear, holding a cup of coffee. She looked at Spencer crying on the pavement without surprise, without sympathy, not even with disgust. Been standing there long? She asked calmly. Spencer raised his head, his eyes red. He sank to his knees, grabbing at her coat. Ellie, I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. Come back to me. Let's get married again. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee and said nothing. Spencer crawled closer, trying to grab her leg, but she stepped back. Ellie, I know I wronged you. What happened with Madison was a lapse in judgment. I swear I'll never do anything like that again. Please forgive me. Spencer, are you crying here because you love me? Eleanor asked. Spencer froze for a moment, then nodded desperately. Of course I love you. I've always loved you, and Madison was just a moment of weakness. Don't talk nonsense, Eleanor cut him off. You don't love me. You love my academic papers, my skills, my connections, my money. You didn't lose me. You lost everything your life was built upon. Tears streamed from Spencer's eyes. That's not true. Eleanor crouched down to look him in the eyes. Spencer, I'll tell you 3 things. First, the creditor of your father's company is me. That $3 million is a loan I issued to your family on behalf of the investment firm I inherited from my mother. And now I'm demanding it be repaid within 3 months. Spencer's face instantly went pale. Second, Eleanor continued. I gave the original copy of your clinical dossier to Zane, but my lawyer has a copy. If you don't want it to end up in civil court, cooperate obediently with the investigation. Spencer's lips trembled. And third, Eleanor straightened up, most importantly, the baby in Madison's belly is not yours. Spencer's head snapped up. What did you say? Eleanor smiled beautifully, but there was not a drop of warmth in her eyes. You didn't know? Before you. Madison was having an affair with Dr. Ian Kennedy from your department. Ian Kennedy is married. His wife is Dr. Linda Patterson, the hospital administrator. When Madison got pregnant, Kennedy abandoned her. And that's when she found you. Everything scrambled in Spencer's head. Dr. Kennedy. Ian Kennedy, 10 years older, from the same surgical team. The balding, beer-bellied, stuttering Ian Kennedy. You're lying. Spencer shouted. Madison is not like that. Eleanor pulled a lab report from her pocket and tossed it to Spencer. This is the result of Madison's ultrasound from 3 months ago. Look at the gestational age. 7 weeks. 3 months ago, you and Madison weren't together yet. You only got close 2 months ago. So this baby can't be yours. Spencer picked up the paper, his hands were shaking violently. 7 weeks, 3 months ago. Back then, he and Madison were just colleagues, barely even speaking. He remembered the day Madison confessed her love to him. She said she had loved him for a long time, that she admired his talent and character. She acted so sincere, so naive, like an innocent girl. But in reality, she had just been knocked up and was looking for someone to pin the belly on. Spencer felt nauseous. He scrambled to the curb and threw up. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching him. Passersby stopped and recorded videos. Some laughed, some shook their heads. Some whispered that he got what he deserved. Eleanor went back into the courtyard and closed the door. She leaned against it and exhaled. Outside, Spencer's crying grew louder and louder. She thought that this man, no, this piece of garbage, finally understood what retribution meant. Chapter 6. Humiliation at the family dinner. Spencer's mother, Lucille Sterling, was a domineering woman. She had worked as a head nurse at a public hospital for 20 years, had seen it all, and had developed a cynical outlook on life. When Eleanor married into the family, Lucille doted on her daughter-in-law because Eleanor's father was a major figure in the healthcare system. When Eleanor's father retired, Lucille's attitude changed. Sweet Ellie, eat some more, shifted to Eleanor. Why are you working late again? And then to, 5 years of marriage and still no belly. Do you have a problem? Eleanor endured it all because Spencer defended her every time. She didn't know that in front of his mother, Spencer said entirely different things. Mom, I'd gladly divorce her, but even though her father is retired, his connections remain. Now that Eleanor and Spencer were divorced, Lucille was on cloud 9. She called all their relatives and invited them to a family dinner over the weekend. She specifically chose an expensive Manhattan restaurant and booked a large banquet hall to celebrate her son's liberation from slavery. She had no idea her son was currently drowning in that very same slavery. On Saturday evening, the whole family gathered at the restaurant. Lucille wore a bright red dress, her hair styled, her makeup heavy. She sat at the head of the table, smiling from ear to ear. Spencer sat next to her, his face sallow and his eyes sunken, as if he had aged 10 years. He kept his eyes glued to his phone and tried not to look at anyone. An aunt walked over and asked, Spencer, they say you found a young, beautiful girl. When will you bring her around to show us? The corner of Spencer's mouth twitched. He stayed silent. Lucille immediately answered for him. Soon, soon. Madison is such a wonderful girl. I've met her. A doctor, a beauty. And most importantly, she's pregnant. We'll have an heir in the family. The relatives cheered, offering congratulations. Joy filled the room. Spencer's father, Peter Sterling, sat on the other side and frowned. He was a decent man who owned a small medical supply manufacturing company. Business hadn't been great in recent years, and the company only stayed afloat thanks to the connections of Eleanor's family. Did you make a clean break with Eleanor? He asked his son quietly. What about her father? Don't mention her, Spencer snapped irritably. Peter sighed and went silent. The food was brought out: oysters, scallops, lobster. The table was overflowing with delicacies. Lucille raised her glass. Let's all raise our glasses. Let's congratulate my son on his new life. Before she could finish, the doors to the banquet hall swung open. Eleanor stood in the doorway. She wore a long emerald velvet dress. Her hair was swept up into an elegant updo, and a string of pearls rested against her neck. Light makeup accentuated her sharp, elegant beauty. Behind her stood a middle-aged man in a business suit, carrying a briefcase. The smile froze on Lucille's face. Eleanor walked in, smiling, and said, Mother, I mean Lucille, hello. I heard you were having a family dinner, and I happened to be dining in the next room. I came by to raise a glass to you. Lucille's face turned blotchy. Who invited you here? You're not welcome here. Eleanor ignored her and turned to Peter Sterling. She grabbed a bottle from the table, poured herself a glass of red wine, and walked over to him. Peter, I want to drink to you. Thank you for your care these past 5 years. Peter awkwardly stood up and clinked glasses with her. Eleanor drank to the bottom, set the glass down, and looked at the gathered relatives. Honored guests, I came today not just to drink. I want to make an announcement. She took a folder of documents from the man behind her and held it up. This is Mr. Vaughn, my attorney. And this is a transfer of ownership agreement for Peter Sterling's company, Sterling Medical Supplies. My investment firm, which I own outright, has acquired 51% of Sterling Medical Supplies. Dead silence filled the room. Peter's face turned as white as paper. What did you say? Your investment firm? Yes, Peter, Eleanor replied. The investment firm is the inheritance my mother left me. 3 years ago, when your company began having financial difficulties, you took a $3 million loan from it. You signed a stock pledge agreement. If you fail to repay the loan on time, the company has the right to buy out your shares. She flipped a few pages. This August, the loan term expired. You didn't repay it on time. Therefore, according to the agreement, my company executed the buyout of the shares. I am now the de facto owner of Sterling Medical Supplies. The silverware slipped from Peter's hands. You're lying. Lucille screamed. You swindled us out of our company. Eleanor glanced at her and said calmly, Lucille, your husband signed the contract personally. All the legal documents are in order. If you believe something is wrong, you can take it to court. Lucille shook with rage, grabbed a glass, and lunged at Eleanor. Spencer caught her arm. Mom, don't do it. Eleanor looked at Spencer and smiled. Spencer, there is one more thing I want you to know. The baby in Madison's belly is not yours. An uproar broke out in the room. What, not Spencer's? Really? Eleanor raised her voice. 3 months ago, Madison was having an affair with Dr. Ian Kennedy from your hospital. Kennedy abandoned her, and then she found Spencer. You can verify this yourselves. Spencer jumped up, veins bulging on his face. Eleanor, that's enough. Did you come here specifically to ruin everything? Yes. Eleanor looked at him and articulated clearly, I came to collect my debts. Spencer, you don't just owe me $1 million for the house. You owe me for the 327 academic papers I wrote for you over these 5 years, and for the 28 years of my life that you ruined. It became so quiet in the room that you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Eleanor turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, she stopped. By the way, Lucille, she turned around, you were just congratulating your son on his new life. I think you're quite mistaken. He didn't lose a negligent wife. He lost the foundation that allowed him to live in luxury. The door clicked shut. Deathly silence reigned in the hall. Lucille collapsed into her chair, all color drained from her face. Peter covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. Spencer stood by the table like a statue. Lucille, an aunt said quietly, the food is getting cold. No one touched their plates. Spencer suddenly sprinted out of the hall. He caught up to Eleanor outside the restaurant just as she was getting into her car and grabbed her arm. Ellie. He yelled. You can't do this to my father. That company is all he has. It's his life's work. Eleanor pulled her arm away. His life's work? What about mine, Spencer? When you were cheating on me, did you think about my life's work? When you were throwing me out of the house without a dime, did you think about the fact that my mother's money had been locked up in your father's company for 3 years? Spencer had no answer. Eleanor got into the car. She rolled down the window and, looking at Spencer standing in the rain, the story of you and Madison will have many more interesting developments. Wait for the sequel. The car drove off. Spencer was left standing at the restaurant entrance. The rain poured harder, soaking his suit through. His phone vibrated. It was a news alert push notification. Vice Chair of Surgery at Manhattan General suspected of forging medical records. Investigation results to be announced next week. Spencer closed his eyes. The ground was crumbling beneath his feet. Chapter 7. Exposing Madison's plot. Madison was 4 months pregnant. Her stomach was noticeably round, unable to be hidden even by loose clothing. She lived alone in the rented apartment, surviving on food delivery. Spencer wasn't answering her calls or texts. She tried to find him at the hospital, but security blocked her, saying she wasn't an employee and family members weren't allowed in. She went to his apartment, only to find the locks changed. Neighbors told her he had moved out 3 days ago to parts unknown. Only then did Madison realize she had been dumped. And it wasn't just Spencer. She had been dumped by everyone. The hospital rejected her. The testing center accused her of cheating. Her program director refused to recommend her. Even her parents weren't picking up the phone, because her mother, upon finding out she was pregnant out of wedlock, ended up in the hospital. She sat on the floor of the rented apartment, staring at her phone screen. A friend had sent her a text. "Madison, I heard about your situation. Don't be mad, but I can't help you. My boyfriend said you crossed someone very powerful. You should just go back to your hometown, don't stay here." Madison replied with one word, "Okay." She tossed the phone aside and rubbed her belly. 4 months. If she didn't get an abortion now, she would have to give birth. But she had no money for the procedure, and no hospital wanted to take her. She had become infamous in medical circles, and no one wanted anything to do with her. Suddenly, a vicious, cruel idea popped into her head. She would induce a miscarriage, but not by herself. She would frame someone else. She would make everyone believe that Eleanor was responsible for the loss of her baby. Then Eleanor's reputation would be destroyed. Even if she didn't go to prison, she would face a devastating lawsuit and the stigma of a murderer. Madison began planning. First, she tracked down where Eleanor frequented most. The hospital, her townhouse, a fitness club, and a coffee shop called the Elm Cafe. She decided to strike at the cafe. That day, Madison arrived at the Elm Cafe early and sat in a corner. She ordered a glass of warm water and hid a pre-prepared bottle of mifepristone, an abortion pill, in her pocket. She sent Eleanor a text. "I'm at the Elm Cafe, I want to talk to you about Spencer. I have something to tell you. If you don't come, I'll go to the press." Eleanor replied, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Madison's heart pounded. The plan was this. When Eleanor arrived, she would provoke a fight. Then she would stage it, so Eleanor pushed her, secretly swallow the pill, and when the ambulance arrived, she would say Eleanor caused the miscarriage. There were cameras in the cafe, but she knew where the blind spots were. That corner was the perfect spot. She had calculated everything. 20 minutes later, Eleanor walked through the door. She wore a crisp white blouse, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She looked fresh and resolute. Seeing Madison, she walked over without hesitation and sat down. "Say what you wanted to say." Eleanor's voice was calm. Madison forced a smile. "Dr. Vance, I don't want to fight with you anymore. I realized my mistake. I want to leave Spencer and start over. Can you forgive me?" Eleanor looked at her, narrowing her eyes. "Madison, what is that in your pocket?" Madison's heart skipped a beat. She instinctively covered her pocket with her hand. "Mifepristone," Eleanor continued. "The abortion pill. You're planning to take it right in front of me, and then blame me for medical malpractice and assault. Am I right?" Madison's face turned chalk white. "How? How do you know?" Eleanor leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Madison, before coming here, did you happen to forget to turn off the camera in your apartment? I tapped into the surveillance system of your rental unit a long time ago." Madison's mind reeled. "Camera?" Eleanor pulled out her phone, played a video, and held it up to her. On the screen, Madison sat on the bed in her apartment, holding the exact bottle and muttering, "When I take this, I'll say Eleanor pushed me. Let's see how she talks her way out of a lawsuit." Madison's hands shook. She tried to snatch the phone, but Eleanor pulled it away. "Madison, you're out of options," Eleanor said. "I've already sent this video to my lawyer. If you try to frame me, this video will become evidence. Then you'll face not only prison time for extortion and falsifying evidence, but a massive civil suit for defamation. Furthermore, mifepristone at 4 months doesn't cause a simple miscarriage, it causes severe hemorrhaging. You are willing to risk bleeding out right here just to ruin me." Tears streamed down Madison's face. She fell to her knees and grabbed Eleanor's arm. "Dr. Vance, I'm begging you, don't go to the police. I really realized my mistake. I shouldn't have done this. Please let me go. My baby can't be left without a mother." Eleanor looked down at her. There was not a shred of sympathy in her eyes. "Madison, just a minute ago, you were trying to destroy my reputation, and now you're begging me to let you go. Do you think I'll forgive you?" "I know I'm a monster," Madison sobbed. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but my baby is innocent. You can't force an unborn child to pay for my sins." Eleanor pulled her arm away and stood up. "Calm down. I won't go to the police. Not because I forgive you, but because you're not worth my time." She pulled a piece of paper from her bag and threw it on the table. "This is the result of Ian Kennedy's DNA test. The baby in your belly is his. I've already sent a copy of this report to his wife, Dr. Linda Patterson. And who Dr. Patterson is, you probably know better than I do." Madison's face went entirely pale. "Doctor, Patterson was the most terrifying woman in the entire hospital. She had long heard rumors about her husband's affairs, but she lacked proof. Now that she had the DNA report in her hands, Kennedy was finished, and Madison even more so. Eleanor turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, she stopped and, without looking back, said, "Madison, you'd better go back to your hometown. There's no place for you in this city anymore." The cafe door clicked shut. Madison collapsed onto the floor. A few patrons cast strange glances her way. She didn't know that Eleanor hadn't told the whole truth. The video really was from her apartment, but the camera hadn't been installed by Eleanor. It was installed by the landlord because the previous tenants were involved in fraud. Eleanor simply knew the landlord and happened to see the footage. Sometimes coincidences in this world are more terrifying than any plot. Chapter 8. Spencer on his knees. The results of the hospital's investigation were announced. Spencer Sterling was found guilty of 2 counts of gross medical negligence. The punishment: termination of employment, revocation of his medical license, and an order to pay $2 million in malpractice settlements to the 2 patients, plus a $100,000 fine to the hospital. He had no such money. His father's company was already controlled by Eleanor, and his father's monthly salary barely covered the interest on their loans. His mother Lucille's pension was small, barely enough to live on. Spencer sold all his assets, his car, several expensive watches, and even that Chanel jacket Madison wore. He listed it on Poshmark and sold it for a fraction of the cost. He scraped together $500,000, but it wasn't enough. In the end, his father Peter sold their old apartment to cover the remaining balance. On the day of the closing, Peter stood outside the real estate office, looking at the building where he had lived for 30 years, and cried. Spencer stood next to him, unable to speak. He knew he was the one to blame. If he hadn't cheated, if he had lived normally with Eleanor, if he hadn't been so greedy. But there are no ifs in life. Madison's punishment was harsher. For forging documents, conspiracy to commit fraud on her medical licensing exams, and attempted extortion, she was sentenced to 18 months in a medium-security prison. She didn't appeal because she couldn't afford a lawyer. Her mother disowned her. Madison's father, Michael Blake, also ended up in a holding cell. He was sentenced to 30 days in county jail on accessory charges. When he got out, he vanished without a trace. On the day Madison was transferred to prison, she stood by the iron gates and looked back. Outside was a blue sky and bright sunshine. She remembered how a year ago, fresh out of med school in her white coat, she had started her residency. Everyone praised her, called her smart and beautiful. Back then, she had 2 paths. Work honestly, study hard to pass her boards, or take the easy way out, seduce a rising star surgeon, and secure her life through a man. She chose the second path. Now, she regretted it, but it was too late. Victor Zane became the chief of general surgery and was named Doctor of the Year. His portrait hung on the wall of honor in the hospital lobby. He smiled from ear to ear. Ian Kennedy was thrown out of the house by his wife, Dr. Patterson, leaving him with nothing. She sent his and Madison's illegitimate child to upstate New York to be raised by Kennedy's parents. He now worked at a low-end urgent care clinic. His salary barely covered his rent. His new girlfriend was a divorced nurse, 2 years younger than him but looking 10 years older. Eleanor's townhouse had been converted into a high-end private OB/GYN clinic. She was both the owner and the sole practicing physician. Many guests attended the grand opening. Eleanor's former colleagues, her patients, her med school classmates, including Professor Zimmerman. The professor brought a bottle of red wine, clinked glasses, with Eleanor, and said quietly, "Ellie, you acted ruthlessly." Eleanor smiled. "Ruthless? I think it was just right." The professor shook his head. "Spencer Sterling is finished in this town. He brought it on himself," Eleanor said, taking a sip of wine. The clinic, located in the historic Manhattan building, was furnished with exquisite taste, and all the equipment was state-of-the-art. Eleanor spent big money on a new 4D ultrasound machine and hired 2 nurses and a receptionist. In the 3rd week after opening, an unusual patient came to see her. A 42-year-old woman, pregnant with her 2nd child. She used to see doctors at the public hospital, but it was too crowded. Every visit meant waiting in line for half a day. Friends recommended Eleanor's clinic. Eleanor performed an examination, discovered the baby was in a breech position, and recommended a C-section. The patient grew nervous. "Dr. Vance, are you a good surgeon? I heard you used to work at Manhattan General." "Don't worry," Eleanor smiled. "I worked there for 6 years, performed over 1,000 surgeries, and never made a single mistake. Unlike some." She didn't name names, but the patient understood. Her husband also worked in the healthcare system and had heard about the Spencer Sterling case. Dr. Vance, I trust you, the patient said seriously, squeezing her hand. The surgery was scheduled for Friday morning. Eleanor operated herself. The anesthesiologist was an old colleague from her previous hospital. The surgery was a success. In 40 minutes, the patient delivered a healthy baby boy weighing almost 9 pounds. His cry was loud and strong. The patient's husband was waiting outside the operating room. Hearing the baby's cry, he wept tears of joy. He grabbed Eleanor's hand and repeated, "Thank you," dozens of times. Taking off her gloves and washing her hands, Eleanor saw her reflection in the mirror. She was 35 years old. Fine lines had appeared in the corners of her eyes. A few gray strands showed in her hair, but her eyes shone like the photographs of her mother in her youth. There was light in those eyes. She remembered her mother's words before her death. "Ellie, you have to live a better life than I did." She had done it. That afternoon, Eleanor drove to the cemetery to visit her mother's grave. She bought a bouquet of white lilies and laid them on the headstone. "Mom," she said quietly, "I put Michael Blake behind bars. He is a bad man." "You were right." The wind blew, rustling the white petals. "Mom, I turned our house into a clinic. I'm my own boss now. I don't have to bow down to anyone anymore." "Don't worry." She crouched down and stroked her mother's photo on the gravestone. "Mom, I got divorced. That man turned out to be a scumbag. He got involved with Michael Blake's daughter. But it doesn't matter. I took care of him." She stood up, dusting off her dress. "Mom, I'm leaving now. I'll come back next time." She turned and walked toward the cemetery exit. The sun illuminated her path. At the gates stood her white BMW X7, her new car. She got in and started the engine. The car slowly rolled out of the cemetery grounds. Her phone rang. It was the clinic receptionist. "Dr. Vance, you have another patient scheduled for this afternoon. Don't be late." "I know, I'm on my way," Eleanor smiled. She hung up and rolled down the window. The wind blew through her hair. In the rearview mirror, the cemetery grew smaller and smaller, finally disappearing behind the horizon. Eleanor stepped on the gas. The car merged onto the wide highway. Ahead was an open road, lined with green trees on both sides. The sun flooded the asphalt with light. It looked like a river of gold. Eleanor felt that her life had finally begun anew. Without Spencer, without Madison, without all that filth. Only her clinic, and her future. She thought to herself that in this lifetime, she would never again spend sleepless nights writing academic papers for any man.